As of 1 week ago, energy sales were the Kremlin's cash cow, and the EU was hesitant to cut off Russia's oil and gas supplies in light of the crisis in Ukraine. Europe was reliant on Gazprom's supply pipelines, and Brussels has made little progress in reducing that reliance. In 2020, Russia accounted for 35% of total EU gas imports, up from 26% in 2010. Italy's Prime Minister Mario Draghi has advised against including energy in sanctions against Russia, while Germany's Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen has said that all options were on the table. Additionally, the EU imported around half of its hard coal from Russia. In this video, we will answer who will supply gas to Europe if Russia cuts the supply. 1 week ago, the EU was considering penalties on Russia's oil and gas industry, although they did not seem to apply to direct hydrocarbon deliveries to Europe. However, there may have been some pressure on European corporations interested in Russian liquefied natural gas, or LNG projects. The larger political issue was whether residents of Western Europe were ready to make sacrifices for Ukraine. The United States and the European Union were contemplating whether to add secondary measures in a package intended to dissuade Russia from future advances in Ukraine, while China had spoken out against prospective restrictions. However, in order for the West to really coerce Russia, it would need further buy-in from other nations across the globe due to the global structure of supply networks. It is critical to note that the objective of this sanctions package was distinct from that of 2014. Now that Russia has invaded Ukraine and continued to escalate tensions, Europe has imposed sanctions on Russia. Due to the fact that Europe buys 40% of its natural gas from Russia, this severe measure of enforced sanctions is expected to result in gas shortages and price increases throughout the whole area of Europe. With the introduction of sanctions by the major importers of Russian gas, beginning with Germany and Italy, new plans for obtaining an alternative gas supply are being developed. Of the sanctions placed on Russia, Germany's formal suspension of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project is one of the most significant steps done so far by any nation. Germany imports over 60% of its natural gas from Russia. Oil, gas, and airline ticket costs may increase as a consequence of the sanctions and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Oil prices increased to more than $100 per barrel this week, with some fearing that they may reach even $150 in the coming weeks. Similarly, gas prices might rise in response to a potential shortage. Italy has also been in the forefront of energy sanctions on Russia. Numerous European nations have imposed symbolic restrictions on Russia, including penalties against Russian media outlets for fear of disinformation and sanctions against Russia's defense minister. However, when it comes to energy-related penalties, unanimity is a possibility but not a certainty, notwithstanding Italy's declaration of unanimity on energy-related sanctions. There has been a reliance on natural gas as a source of energy in Europe. The majority of the world's nations are changing their energy output away from coal and toward natural gas. China and European nations are pioneers in this field. They are increasingly replacing coal and nuclear energy production with natural gas, which will exacerbate the need for Russian gas. Europe relies on Russia for their energy supply. Europe is significantly reliant on Russia for natural gas supplies. Europe imports over half of its natural gas from Russia on average, with France importing 20%, Germany 60%, the UK 5%, and the remainder 40%. The United States will provide assistance to Europe. Since the commencement of the Ukraine crisis, the U.S. has been assisting the EU in identifying a replacement. The collaboration aims to mitigate the effect on the U.S. of anticipated supply disruptions as a result of the enforced sanctions. Europe utilizes around 500 billion cubic meters of natural gas yearly, while Russia consumes 400 billion cubic meters and Germany consumes 100 billion cubic meters. Norway and the Netherlands are the EU's closest natural gas-producing nations. The EU may look at these nations for gas supply, but these countries are already at capacity. Additionally, the gas supply from these nations has been declining in recent years. LNG is the next gas supply alternative. Number 1, Qatar. Qatar is the greatest choice as a possible LNG provider since it possesses the third biggest LNG reserves in the world after Russia and Iran. The issue with depending on Qatar is that the majority of its LNG supply is contractually bound to other nations, mostly Asian ones. Even if these contracts are renegotiated, Qatar will be unable to meet Europe's gas needs. According to Qatar's energy minister, no one nation will be able to supply Europe's gas demand since the majority of their contracts are long-term. Number 2, the USA. The United States is the next prospective LNG provider since it is the third biggest LNG exporter after Australia and Qatar. Several dozen American tankers have arrived in Europe in recent weeks, but even these shipments will fall short of meeting the gas shortage. According to 2016 figures, the United States began boosting its LNG exports. The United States exported 70 billion cubic feet of natural gas globally in 2021. Only 25 billion cubic feet of this amount has been shipped to Europe, accounting for less than 5% of European LNG imports. While the European Union presently has plenty of gas in storage, it will need to increase its natural gas output in order to fulfill the region's energy needs. European gas storage levels have declined less than anticipated as a result of a mild winter and historic LNG exports, but replenishment will be difficult this summer. The winter gas season begins in October and ends in March, whereas the summer gas season begins in April. In the summer, wholesale gas prices and demand are often lower and more gas is stored. That, however, did not occur last year. Global supply was constrained by strong Asian demand for LNG and lower than average Russian gas pipeline flows. Wholesale costs were especially high during the summer season, limiting storage injections. As a consequence, Europe started winter with the lowest level of gas storage in at least a decade. Concerns about Russian gas supplies being blocked if the nation invades Ukraine had driven prices to all-time highs. Russia had gathered soldiers near Ukraine's border but had constantly denied their plans to invade. While storage is not likely to reach critical levels until winter, this does have an effect on replenishing demand this summer. Northwest European storage levels are around 10% below 2021 levels. Europe-wide storage capacity remained at a 5-year low of 32.6%, according to statistics from Gas Infrastructure Europe. In January, Europe got a record 13.15 billion cubic meters of LNG exports after Asia ceased competing for Atlantic basin cargoes. LNG receipts in Europe are projected to stay strong this year, but will decline from present levels as Asian importers replenish, Japan uses LNG to offset nuclear outages, and overall demand in Asia rises. However, additional LNG capacity coming online this year may increase supply, and producers may delay LNG infrastructure maintenance outages to capitalize on high prices. Russia is unlikely to increase its natural gas exports this year, given its unwillingness to book new pipeline capacity to Europe. Additionally, there is a lack of financial motivation to refill. Gas storage is not free. This implies that purchasers demand lower prices in the summer relative to the next winter in order to stockpile supplies, yet wholesale gas prices remain consistently high until the following year. According to a draft document seen by Reuters on Friday, the European Union is proposing mandating nations to fill natural gas storage tanks ahead of each winter in order to help increase stockpiles and deal with supply interruptions. The Commission is proposing a legislative obligation that member states maintain a minimum level of storage by September 30th each year. Enterprises are unlikely to store enough gas only on the basis of market incentives, given gas prices are forecast to stay high at least until the end of this year. The European Union and the United States are in discussions with OPEC members, particularly Qatar, about possible alternatives to Russian natural gas. However, as previously stated, this is not a viable option given OPEC's low gas production capacity and the preponderance of its contracts with Asian countries. The final answer is for Europe to fully recognize its reliance on Russia for natural gas supplies. It lacks viable alternatives, owing to the lack of substantial reserves and limited natural gas production capability. Gas is a widely traded and utilized commodity on a worldwide scale. The average person in the U.S. and Europe are feeling the pinch of probable price increases. Sanctions proposed are just financial regulatory measures with no prospect of implementation. In summary, the energy restrictions imposed on Russia as a strategic risk have a boomerang effect on Europe and the U.S., who cannot afford it. Thus, the sanctions might be seen as a danger to Russia's economic viability. Are these energy sanctions likely to be implemented or not? The outcome will be determined by future events. What else would you like us to talk about in our upcoming videos? Let us know in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of our videos.